wanted to say a big thank you to our sponsor, Talent Insights. Talent Insights are Australia's leading data specialist recruitment business. They are experts in recruitment strategy and delivery for analytics and data teams. They are the go-to recruitment business for all your data roles in Australia, and they can help both with permanent hires and short-term project-focused data resources. I've used Talent Insights in the past, and I've always found them fantastic to work with. Visit them at talentinsights.com.au. Hi, and welcome everyone to Data Futurology. My name is Felipe Flores. I am your host in Data Futurology. We speak with leaders and executives from around the world that work in the analytics, data science, and AI space. In today's episode, we are speaking with the hosts of another podcast called AI Today. It has a very similar focus to Data Futurology, and I think the AI Today podcast is a fantastic podcast. We'll have some links for everyone to check it out. I encourage you guys to check it out. So we have Kathleen Walch. She is the managing partner of Cognilytica, and she is also the host of the AI Today podcast. And also we have Ron Schmelzer, who is also a managing partner at Cognilytica and a host of the AI Today podcast. So please check out the podcast. And also during the podcast, they tell us a little bit about their CPMAI methodology, which is a methodology to run ML and AI projects in a way that's repeatable and you get more consistent results. And I know that a lot of people in the audience have been looking for how to solve that problem. So it's great that we get to discuss that with Ron and Kathleen. Thank you so much. Here's the episode with the host of the AI Today podcast. I hope you enjoy it.
Hello, and welcome to the AI Today podcast. I'm your host, Kathleen Walch.
And I'm your host, Walch Schmelzer. And we have another fantastic podcast for you today. We have been talking, honestly, for the last couple hours with Felipe Flores, who is the host of the Data Futurology podcast, which is a fantastic podcast, also really tackling a lot of the same issues that we talk about here on the AI Today podcast, which is really about making AI an implementation reality. You know, we think about all of the sort of the promise and the hype and the theory of what we can do with AI. But of course, for those of you in our listening audience who are actually trying to put AI together, whether you're in the private sector, in large companies or small companies, or you're a consulting firm, or you're working in the public sector, you know, in the government's international, federal, state, local, or a government contractor, you know, you're running into some real challenges of making AI work. And so a lot of what we do here on the AI Today podcast is, first of all, talk to the others who have been putting AI into practice and some of their issues and their challenges, but also talk about sort of some of the challenges and the solutions. And, you know, on that note, we are just so thrilled to have with us, as I mentioned, Felipe Flores, who's the host of the Data Futurology podcast, a fantastic podcast that I listen to, and we will definitely be linking to in the show notes. So, Felipe, thank you so much for joining us on AI Today.
Guys, are you kidding me? Thank you. This has been amazing. and just before we started recording, I was saying how I feel that we're so well aligned in terms of that we want to bring content to the community that helps people get value out of AI, make more dreams a reality, and to highlight different use cases, different challenges, bring different perspectives of how people have been overcoming these challenges, and to help bridge the gap between the AI hype and the AI reality in a way that empowers people and helps them move AI forward in their organization, and obviously from the value side as well. So our focus is definitely very well aligned, and it's amazing to spend some time with you guys.
Yeah. So, you know, we're also on Felipe's podcast, the Data Futurology podcast. And so we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes so that our listeners can listen to our interview with you. It was a really incredible conversation. And you're right, we really are aligned. So I encourage our listeners to check that out. But I'd like to start by having you introduce yourself to our listeners and tell them a little bit about your background, your podcast, and why you started your podcast.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll give you the sort of the quick version. So I'm originally from South America. I grew up in Chile, in the north part of Chile, in the driest desert in the world. So over there, it rains once every 7 years, and we get less than an inch of rain. And so I grew up in a small mining town, 10,000 people, and I came to Australia when I was about 20, and started work, and I did kind of like odd jobs, then got into data and loved it. And did about 7 years of working in consulting, small and large businesses. Then I started my own analytics consulting company. Did that for about 5 years, grew it to about 50 people. And then we were doing data-driven products online. We had 2 or 3 different products, and we did also consulting, which those consulting profits helped us hire people to do the development of the products. I sold my part. This is over 10 years ago now. Oh, yeah. No, maybe a bit less, but yeah, I'm getting old. And then I spent some time in finance, and I was head of data science in one of the biggest banks in Australia. And that was a great opportunity to build a team and develop the culture and think of really interesting applications of how to use finance data, particularly in the B2B space, where people had people that I care about and that care about me, they had kind of like warned me not to go into the B2B space because there's very little amount of transactions that happen every year, and there's many less customers, like orders of magnitudes less customers than what you have on the retail side. But what we end up finding is that you can leverage the retail data to do really interesting B2B work, and that can feed back into the retail side. So that was a really nice marriage. And then after finance, I moved into healthcare. So now I'm head of data and technology for a healthcare AI startup, where we started at the start of last year. So in Jan 2020, we got some seed funding from 2 companies, one in Australia, and then one in the US. The US is like a huge global brand. It's called Cigna. So they're a health insurer. And both companies came together, put some money, some seed investment into what's now Honeysuckle Health, and we started this business. We've got essentially three pillars. Where one, we have health management programs, so we help people recover after they have surgery, or we help them with mental health issues, and we do that with programs that are telephonic and digital. So that's been really interesting. That's first pillar. Second pillar is the contracting side. And this is part of what I love to see, and what I've tried to do a lot with my career, is to see kind of like how the hidden part of the world works. And that's why in finance, I was attracted to the B2B side, because you get to see entire supply chains of businesses that serve each other, and businesses that you never heard about. Like who makes the McDonald's hamburger cases, like the cardboard cases. Like we worked with those people. So you get to see the hidden side of the world. In healthcare, the contracting piece is how payers or insurers agree how much they're going to pay the providers. So the hospitals, the specialists, the family doctors. And there's been historically a lot of information asymmetry in that space, with like large hospitals negotiating with small insurers, or vice versa, large insurers negotiating with small hospitals. And that information asymmetry has led to really combative relationships. And what we're doing is opening up the data, having agreed metrics, and everyone can see the same. So that's our second pillar. And then the third pillar is data science and analytics consulting. So we work with insurers, with payers, with government, and we provide a lot of consulting pieces that go from sort of population health strategy on the strategic side, that is to say, what are the future healthcare needs and costs of the population, and then how do we make the population healthier over time? And then on the other end, it's things like data capture, where we have a lot of surveys where we ask people to give us the information about their recovery and their outcomes, and how they're feeling about the surgery or the procedure that they had, for us to create the feedback loops in the healthcare system, where we can help people have journeys that help them become healthier. So that's what I've been doing the last couple of years. But then about 4 years ago, maybe just a bit less, in 2018, I started Data Futurology. So I was working in the bank at the time, and the reason kind of what happened, kind of a bit embarrassing, but to admit that I was getting married, and my wife and I were planning a long honeymoon. And we thought like maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months, we'll see what happens. And we're going to go for a long honeymoon. And I was having a chat with my wife, and I was like, we're going to have all this time off. what the hell am I going to do? And she was like, you're a jerk. No, she was like, well, if you like listening to podcasts so much, why don't you start one? And I was like, yeah, that sounds really great. So before we left Australia, I interviewed, I think, about a dozen people that I knew and admired in the industry, released those. And then what I said is, like, wherever we go in this honeymoon, I'm going to reach out to people that live locally, that are experts in this field, and ML, AI, and that they're leaders and that can help us with the challenges and the use cases, as we were talking before. And as we traveled for those 6 months, I interviewed people everywhere we went, in Japan, all over Europe, and then I was getting people from other parts of the world. And I thought I was just going to do it for 6 months. But I thought when we came back to Australia, I'll wrap it up. And then what happened is we came back and we had just under 5,000 listeners at that point. And during that time that we were away, we started getting some sponsors as well, which was helping. Because at the beginning, I always say I didn't know what I was doing, and I was spending a little time doing this when we were on the honeymoon. So getting some sponsors helped, like, start a team. And then when we came back to Australia, the first 2 weeks that we didn't release a podcast, we started getting messages to be like, "Hey, what's going on? Where's my podcast?" So I was like, "Okay, yeah, we better continue." And that's been great, like a wonderful, amazing journey where I get to speak with amazing people from around the world, like you guys, and I've been so grateful and so fortunate about how where this has taken the conversations, and the ability to give back to the community has been incredible. And I think that we're definitely aligned in wanting to help people get more value out of AI and be able to help their organizations increase the adoption, advance the use of AI, and really make a difference in this world. So it's been amazing to be able to do that. I know you guys have been running longer. I think you guys started in September 2017. So I got to say, congratulations on your 4th birthday. And it's amazing to spend time with you guys. And I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. Actually, it's really nice, connecting a lot of dots. We have mining in Chile in the Atacama Desert, and you got Australia and the finance world and the 6-month honeymoon, which I think a lot of people will be like, wow, that's not a very
envious.
So I think that's fantastic. And you're right. I mean, your podcast really does cover a lot of great territory. And, you know, as I said, there's no real competition among podcasters. We really do encourage our listeners to really tune in to that and really catch up. I actually want to go talk about a different 2-letter acronym. We spent a lot of time talking about AI, right? And sort of making all that work. But a lot of people, especially, you know, they're finding that a lot of the putting AI into practice is pretty mundane. It's not nearly like making autonomous robots and self-driving vehicles. A lot of it really looks like predictive analytics and pattern and anomaly recognition, all the things that we like to talk about in our various 7 patterns. But people may be like, hey, wait a second here. We've done some of this stuff before. You know, some of this data science, data analytics, it looks a lot like BI, you know, business intelligence. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, because I know you've had some of the conversations that we have not had in our podcast with folks who are sort of implementing, maybe, you know, coming from traditional BI, traditional data analytics. Kind of, how do you see these concepts marrying? Has BI gone away? Is AI replaced? Or kind of where are we with all that?
Yeah, that is great. I think that there's so much value in BI. It's something that I think continues to deliver value and will continue to deliver value. I think that there's a lot of because of the data space has been around for such a long time. Like, if we think about the first databases being built 40, 50 years ago, there's been a lot of IP and knowledge that has been developed that it's still very relevant and valuable today. Sometimes sometimes as an industry, when we try to keep up with the latest, we sometimes go too far or throw the baby out with the bathwater, and then we don't want to know anything about what happened in the past, when there's bits that we can cherry pick that add a lot of value. Some of that sits in data warehousing, for example, and what data warehouse can teach us about building modern data pipelines. And then another space is in BI, where I think that now, if we grab business intelligence and we marry that with AI, I think that the benefits that can be provided to industry is huge. So what I mean by that is, for example, back when I had my consulting business, one of our first products, data-driven products, we had this marriage of BI and AI for small to medium businesses, where companies at the time, we would upload their company financials and we would give them a set of canned reports, so the BI piece, and on every chart, we would do predictions. So the AI part, we would show them the forecast. We would give them the key drivers. So out of the data that they had uploaded, what were the key drivers that were predictive for this particular chart? And we would give them outliers, anomaly detection, and give them kind of like that next level of information. But it was all presented in a BI tool. Now that's something that as kind of like as a playbook, that's something that I've implemented in a few other industries since, like in retail, in finance, and definitely now in healthcare. And that's just from my experience. But from what we're seeing in the market, there's more and more AI capabilities that are kind of like sneaking into the world of BI and being delivered through BI. And sometimes that's like natural text recognition and be able to interact in that manner with a BI tool, that instead of creating the charts in a manual way, now people are able to essentially ask questions or do the creation of charts by typing. And sometimes that typing is like, where am I getting my best sales in the last quarter by zip code? And then that information comes up to you. So AI is helping BI get more embedded in more places, make it more accessible, and I think that there's a lot more to give in that space. When you focus on the human to computer interaction, there's a lot more that we can do there.
Yeah, those are some great insights. I know in conversations that we've had, we've started talking about BI more and more, from our early days when we started the podcast in 2017, people weren't talking about BI and AI as much. So, great insights there. And I know that you've had, the opportunity to interview many guests on your podcast and also work in industry and be able to see things firsthand. So what are you seeing as some of the biggest trends emerging in data and data science today?
From my perspective, quite a few, but from my perspective, at the moment, people are wanting to get value from AI is a key piece. As we're discussing before, there's been a high failure rate of projects in the space, and people are wondering, like, what do we do better about this? What do we do better? Some of that focus is going to what's called ML ops. So essentially creating a path for your AI product to get to the customer. And that comes with a methodology. There's been a lot of concepts and approaches have been borrowed from software development or software engineering, particularly from the DevOps world, where we want continuous integration, continuous deployment. And in our world, we also need to do continuous testing. Which essentially that means being able to have a system where we can have a champion and challenger approach to deploying models, where data scientists can be working on improving a model and can sort of put them in the pipeline. Both models get run on the same data and the results compared, and then when there's a new champion, that model gets released, and that it's released in a staged manner in your production environment, and that once it's in production, there's a bunch of metrics that need to be monitored that you want to know about your model when it starts degrading in say quality or accuracy, whatever the model is striving to improve or to predict. You want to track how that's going and then know when the model needs to be retrained. And if it can't be retrained and improved automatically, then for the platform to create an alert, essentially, to get human intervention to come in and improve the data set. So that's something that for organizations that had that type of system in place before COVID, that means that they had a huge start, because COVID hit and essentially all our predictive models that interact with customers down the drain. Like, it was a never seen before world in the time that we've been digital. So it meant that a lot of our predictive models didn't apply anymore, didn't work. So if you had those alerts, that monitoring and alerts in place, you would know first, essentially. And if it needed, in this case, it did need manual intervention, you could do that first. And sometimes it was because the intervention was required because there was too much to the upside, as in like too many customers were coming to the website and everything was being bought online, and the business needed to alert that so the business could adjust their physical supply chains, their orders to manage that. Sometimes it was improving the models because of the downside of all the customers that had moved. That, for example, in healthcare, we saw a lot of a huge reduction in elective surgeries. So things that maybe people needed a hip replacement or a knee replacement, and those are stopped, and people decided to wait a long time during COVID, and now it's coming back up.
Yeah, that's really, really great insight. And I think you're right. I mean, a lot of sort of the traditional models have really been thrown out. Supply chains around the world have been completely disrupted. Labor change, you talked about that, healthcare, education, working from home, office real estate, transportation, commuting, telecommunication, the use of the internet. Honestly, what has not been impacted? I think I just talked about almost everything. But we do need to find ways that companies do need to respond and need to be agile. And we're going to have to come out of this. Hopefully, this will motivate people to pay much more attention to their data and ways to basically gain insights from it. So actually, that's one of the things that I'd really like to ask you about. One of the things you do when especially on the podcast, and the other things you've been involved in, you're involved in a lot of stuff down there in Australia with data science, that's for sure. You get the opportunity to really interview a lot of leaders and implementers in AI and data science and in business intelligence. So what are you seeing what are you hearing as some of the common themes, the common data themes, and maybe even some surprising insights that some of your guests have brought up in any of your conversations?
Yeah, amazing. And the ones that have had that stick with me, I think, are and definitely the ones that I seek out is people that are different to me, different in terms of their background, their journey, and their industry experience, anything that's different. I'm really attracted to in terms of learning from that. And so for example, some of those we had the CTO from NASA came on the show, and he was talking, and he wrote a book on deep learning, and he was telling us about how they use online reinforcement learning in the Mars rover, and how, because of the constraints of essentially being in space, the compute was limited, the memory was limited, and that it had to be learning online and then discarding the data, but in a way that then it can continue to improve as it's exploring this new world. Like, stuff like that is amazing. The other ones that I love is the human side, and how to better incentivize, better motivate, better drive adoption is a key piece that I love. One of the ones that I've mentioned before is in the energy space, where an LNG gas plant was asking people whether they wanted to know how they have improved the efficacy of the plant. So essentially, what they were showing in the recommendations was to say, Ron, in this shift 2 weeks ago, you had this plant running at 2% better output. Would you like to know what you did? And they had this opt-in model for the humans after the AI had done kind of like all the work to create their recommendations. And by having this opt-in model that they had in a staged approach, they got huge adoption. They got a lot of feedback during that time. They were able to improve the product and how it worked. They went from comparing you versus you for a year to comparing you versus everyone for another year. But in both of those cases, you had to opt in to find that out. And then once they had 2 years of that, they went to an open suggestion that everyone could see. So it's things like that I love, and that kind of like adoption is in the last mile. The other big piece that I love is seeing the strategy side, and that strategy is kind of like in a one line. It's saying, where do you want to be? Where are you today? And then what's the road to get there? And we've had people that have brought in really interesting frameworks about how to create a data analytics strategy that supports the business strategy. So you always start with the business strategy and what the company wants to achieve, and then how do you plug into that in a way that it helps the stakeholders get a list of business problems that then you can start to attack with these technology and tools that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And we always say that too. Our listeners have heard us talk many times about CPM AI methodology, which is the best practices for doing AI right. And we talk about how you start with business understanding. So you're right. We need to make sure that that's what we're doing, because if you're not solving a business problem, then don't do it. You're going to waste a lot of time and resources and money, and you're going to, go down this rabbit hole to build this AI application that really nobody's using and it's not solving a problem. So don't do it. So great. More validation. Start with your business understanding first. So this has been an incredible podcast and incredible discussion. As I mentioned to our listeners, we were also on the Data Futurology podcast as well. So I'll link to that in the show notes. And I really do encourage you to check that out. We had some great discussions there on all things related to AI. So, that was incredible. But we always like to end our podcast interviews with a final question that we ask all our guests, because we get such varied results or, responses, no matter how many times we've asked this. Some of them can be common themes, but, the examples that they give and their responses really do vary. So as a final note, what do you believe the future of AI is in general and its application to organizations and beyond?
Great question. So I think that as we continue to mature in our adoption of use of AI, I think that everyone's going to become an AI practitioner in the same way that everyone has become a computer practitioner. So if you think about 30 years ago, there were some people that knew how to use computers, and largely people didn't know how to use computers. I think that we're going to a similar path with AI. And to do that, it means that AI needs to be more accessible, more automated, easier to understand, both understand, use, deploy. And that the key components, in my view, that are going to help us there is to help people understand that the data is the input to the problems that they need to solve. Be very clear about what they're trying to predict or optimize, like the variable that they're trying to go with, and then have some really interesting and some really proven methods to deploy that to the users. I think that we're going to see a lot of improvement and automation that will help drive those forward and essentially support those areas. And so as long as people understand that, they'll be able to play in the AI space, add value in the AI space because of the automation that has been coming. And for example, some of that automation looks like AutoML tools that you have open source alternatives like Teapot or PyCarrot. And then obviously you have some software vendors in that space that is going to make it and continues to make it a lot easier to create and deploy machine learning models. So then the human component that we all need to focus on is around the business strategy, the business problem, getting the right data, thinking about the data set, thinking about that target variable that you're trying to predict, and put that in more problems, more solutions. And then with increased automation, we're definitely going to a world where what they say, like the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And one example of that is there's algorithms where you can describe a web page, for example, and have an AI build it. So then we're going to have that for web apps, for software, and then for computer interaction. It's going to be much more human-led. Well, it's going to be able to converse much more naturally with humans. And as a result, there's going to be a lot more innovation and a lot more needs that need to be fulfilled through that process because our wants have no end. So I think that the space is super exciting. More automation, better human to computer interfaces, and more space for us to be really creative with our talents and be more human.
That's fantastic. Well, that's a great answer. We love that. Like more automation, be more human. It's funny. We're talking about adding machine intelligence, and the answer is be more human. So that's fantastic. So, well, really a big thank you. We did talk a little bit about methodology. We didn't have time too much to talk about it on this particular podcast. I'm just being mindful of our host's time here, guest's time here. But for those of you who are listening to us who want to be more informed about doing AI right, go to courses.cognilytica.com. That's courses.cognilytica.com. We have certifications on a variety of levels for doing AI methodology, as well as courses for ethical and responsible AI. That's the other part of doing AI right. It's not just running your projects right and doing it right to be successful. It's also doing it right to stay on the right side of your customers and your employees and the government and your society and all that. Do it right. So on that note, I really want to thank so much our host. I have a feeling we will be seeing you on another podcast because we will definitely have a lot to talk about here. So again, a big thank you to our guest, Felipe Flores, who is with, actually, we just heard a little bit about his startup. He's got their Honeysuckle Health out there in Australia, but also, as you know, the host of the Data Futurology podcast, which we will be linking to. So thank you again so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. This has been amazing. And looking forward to releasing the episode of Data Futurology, hearing this one, and then for us to do more collaborations together in the future. Thank you to all your audience. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and hope to see you guys next time.
Yeah, thank you so much. We had a great time on your podcast and also interviewing you on AI Today as well. And listeners, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, please make sure to rate us on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Well, as always, we'll post any articles and concepts discussed in the show notes, including a link to the Data Futurology podcast, as well as the specific episode that Ron and I were both on. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next episode.
We've been focusing on AI today on the challenges of really making AI work for organizations of all sizes. And we've certainly even interviewed, folks from like the largest of banks and finance and retail, healthcare, automotive, manufacturing, pharmaceutical. But we like talking to small companies, like the 3 or 4 person organizations trying to make it work. The challenges really aren't that much different. So I guess we're starting with the interview on Data Futurology. Like we could start there. Let's do that.
This is great. And I love what you were saying about talking about almost like the possibilities of AI, or the hype and the reality, and how to bridge that gap. That is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, so maybe this is a good time for Kathleen to sort of come on here and talk about that, because lately we've been on a little bit of a kick on methodology, mainly because the technology is fine. I mean, just lots of great choices for doing all the various different patterns of AI. So, but we've been hearing about these high failure rates, and we've been doing these interviews with these CEOs and these CDOs and the chief information officers and all that, and they're telling us, well, we're having all these troubles, and a lot of it has nothing to do with the technology. A lot of it has to do with the way people are doing it, not what they're doing, right, Kathleen?
Exactly. So, as Ron mentioned, we've talked to a lot of different organizations, lots of people from Fortune 1000 organizations to say, hey, how are you running these projects? And, what roadblocks are you running into, and why are they failing? Or why are they not being adopted as broadly as they should? And it really comes down to some fundamental issues around methodology, and they are not using best practices, methodologies, And we're advocates at Cognilytica. We're advocates for the CPM-AI methodology. So it's cognitive project management for AI methodology. And it's really just, a methodology is a set of steps on how you should run your projects so that it can be repeatable, that it's very open and transparent, and people know how you are running it, so that if you want to hire into the organization or you have movement within your organization, people know how you're running these projects. And if somebody leaves, then all of that knowledge didn't leave with them in their head, and you're able to transfer it and continue to run these projects. So what we found is that a lot of these companies are running projects ad hoc and don't have a best practices methodology in place. That can be incredibly frightening. And it also is incredibly wasteful because they're wasting resources and time and money. And then, your project's going to fail. And then, and then you're not going to want to get buy-in for the next project. So we're big advocates of the cognitive project management for AI methodology, but just adopt a methodology, please.
100%. I love that. The way that I think about it is like AI is growing up, but it hasn't got a job yet. And by that, I mean, like, it's not yet giving the returns, like the financial returns. And that's because there is that such high failure rate, like over essentially, like some articles and some studies say like over 85% of AI projects are failing. And so having more standardized approaches is definitely the key. People are really, well, at least from what I'm seeing, all the focus is about that, getting value from AI, getting wider use, wider adoption, and be able to have a consistent rate of successful projects.
I think that people get so excited about these projects and the possibility of what if and, what it could possibly do, that they really jump the gun and just get started. We regularly get asked, do you start with a business understanding? So are you trying to solve an actual problem, or a data understanding, making sure that you have the actual data? And we go, well, if you look at the CPM-AI methodology, it says start with a business understanding, because if you're not actually solving a problem, then don't do it, right? We always say, don't do AI just to do AI. So make sure that you're actually solving a real business problem. And within the methodology, we talk about this AI go, no go. It's a 9-factor decision chart. And you need to make sure that you're answering yes to all of these questions before you're ready to move forward with your project. So one of the questions is, are you solving an actual business problem? But another question that you need to answer is, are you going to actually get buy-in and adoption from the stakeholders that are meant to use your new, AI solution? And if the answer is no, then don't do it. So, you need to go through this checklist and make sure that you're actually have everything yes to move forward. Otherwise, you're not ready to begin. Doesn't mean you can't, but means maybe you're not ready to begin, or you're not starting with the correct problem. So, we always say that's really important. And I think that a lot of organizations also kind of get lost in that, excitement, and they just want to start something and they're so excited that they kind of don't answer these fundamental, what problem am I really trying to solve?
100%. Yeah, definitely happens all the time. It has happened to, like the best people out there. I've definitely made those mistakes in the past. And what I see is that the AI community sort of, at least in industry, is growing up from this cottage industry where a lot of leaders and a lot of business people were seeing AI as the magic bullet, or the silver bullet that could do anything, and the hype definitely started to get the best out of people. But then when AI is in organizations for a long time, I feel like people were not engaging with it enough. And by this, I mean the organization at large. They were kind of saying, if we keep these data scientists, these AI specialists, kind of like in the corner, they'll work on cool stuff, and then that's just going to come and revolutionize our business. And sometimes it's been the mathematical speak around AI that has provided barriers which people haven't wanted to jump over. And now, as it's becoming more and more adopted and spoken about, people are realizing, like, It's not that hard. It's not magic, and we need to put some processes around it, some governance around it, get a better understanding, and help it mature. So then we have that consistent pipeline. From the specialist perspective, I find that a lot of times people want to continue their specialization, and it's normal human nature to double down what your strengths are on what your strengths are. So if you're good at something, just double down. And then when we look at it from a perspective of getting value from AI, there's a lot of work that needs to be done before the project or before the technical parts of the project start.
Right.
There's the technical delivery, and then there's a lot of work that needs to be done after the fact. And I think those are the areas that we're really across the board. They're areas that we're really fortifying as we're improving. And I love the perspective that you guys have of starting with the business problem, 100%, and especially that business problem will ideally be aligned to the strategy of the organization, and be supporting that from a business problem perspective. And then you want to essentially translate that to a data problem that gets delivered in a way that not guarantees, but that improves the chance of success as a project. Once that's done, then you go into the adoption side. So whose lives are going to change as a result of this being rolled out? Whose day is going to look different? And can we have them chipping in their thoughts and perspectives as we're doing the project? Because afterwards, we're like, the only way that we're going to get value from this thing is if people are interacting with it, using it, liking it, and if it improves their lives. So sometimes it's obviously assisting people making decisions or assisting with some automation. Sometimes those people are inside the company or inside the organization. Sometimes they're outside. But how do we get those people involved in the piece kind of like after the delivery? And obviously at the moment, there's a lot of focus on how do we speed up that delivery side. So all the MLOps perspective, right. Where the way that I think about it is that we're creating like these AI factories, like where if AI was a shoe or a tangible object, we would have a factory that makes the product, makes the shoe, and then we would have a supply chain that gets it to the customer. So we're definitely made a lot of inroads in my mind. We made a lot of inroads in the factory, in the production producing the AI product, and now we're focusing a lot on improving the supply chain. So we have these roads, the supply chains to get the product to the end customer, and I think that's also going to help the adoption of AI products, the speed of innovation, help us get more value from AI. But the way that that's done comes down to what you were saying, Kathleen, like it's about the methodology and how do you make it repeatable and consistent, so then you can continue to get value. And then once it's in with the customer, it's all about getting that adoption up.
Yeah, I think that's the surprising thing for us in these failures, which is that, well, where are things failing? Is it mismatched expectations, that people are expecting the solution to do one thing and it's really doing something else, and therefore they're having trouble with it? Or is it that they're having trouble getting started because it's trying to bite off too much, boil the ocean, which is, oh my goodness, we need petabytes of data. Oh my goodness, this data needs to be labeled. Oh my goodness, this data is not clean. Now it's like, now this little project becomes this gigantic project. They're like, we're not going to look, we're 3 months into this thing. We didn't realize how bad the data was, or we don't have the data. We need to do the labeling. And then they stop. And then it's like, wait a second, isn't iteration a best practice? Right? It is. Agile is a best practice. Let's not, if we need to do this big problem, how can we chop the big problem into smaller problems? And of course, ironically, when you do that, that makes the data set that you need much more manageable, because we're not trying to do the whole thing. We're just trying to do a small bit. That makes it much easier to clean. That makes it much easier to augment. And then I can prove if the small version of the problem can't provide return, then the larger problems I can do anything. So iteration, right? We say think big, start small, iterate often. I can see this.
I love it. Like, yeah, that speaks to my heart, because I think as data scientists, our natural tendency is to go big, go fancy. we want all the data right now, please. We want to be using the latest techniques, and that's where we see our challenges in the technical part. We want to be deploying for the fastest response time. So yeah, more data, cooler algorithms, and faster response times on the deployments are the things that get the data scientists excited. So they naturally go there. Also, it's in my view, and this is just one dude's opinion, but I think that the data scientists and AI specialists are so highly trained people, and I think our education system is geared for getting people to aim for perfection in the first go. So essentially, like your assignment, your exams, like that, you get one shot, and it needs to be as good as you can make it. So there's a lot of pressure. And then when we come into the corporate world, turns out that we have a completely different way of working. We can iterate. We can start small. If there is no solution today, then almost any automated solution is better. And that means that we can start with the dumbest model that produces okay results, which can be done, like in a day. Like it's once the problem has been defined and there's been agreement, and that's what I was saying before, and I know that you guys think the same. The pre-work that needs to happen before getting to the technical bit, it's so important, because then once you hone in into what actually you want to solve as a business problem, and then you shrink down the scope to make it easy to overcome as a barrier, then you're cooking. Like then you're going. You get something out there. You see how you can improve. And what I always say to people is that if somebody thinks that the full-blown solution is going to provide so much value, people are convinced. They're like, no, our MVP needs to be like this huge. And like, if you're so convinced that the whole shebang is going to be so valuable, let's just take one component. And if the big piece is so valuable, then a small component has to be valuable as well. So let's prove this small component. And if it does, then we know that we're on the money, and it's worthwhile continuing to invest. So yeah, sometimes a tree-based model that you can do very quickly is gets you a lot of the way there. And personally, I'm a huge fan of tree-based models, of random forest. I think it's got like so much beauty built into it. And it's definitely always my first.
Nothing wrong with the boosted trees, man. They work really well.
Boosted trees are amazing. I've over the years I've gotten the AI world is so vast and expansive that everyone gets kind of like their area of understanding that they kind of refine over time. For me, I've spent a lot of time with trees, and then some of the things that I've gotten out of random forest is using ML for insights instead of prediction. So with prediction, obviously you want to watch out for things like overfitting, and you want to make sure that your algorithm is the most accurate, and that's kind of like the traditional path of AI, or the most discussed path. There's in my view, there's a whole set of other applications, which is AI for insights, where essentially you're throwing the data at the model, and then you're interrogating the model in creative ways to say, what have you learned about this data that can help me further my understanding, or look for things that I didn't know that were in there. So one example that I've used a lot of times is in applications. It started with applications in retail. So we had retail customers with a number of stores. And in there, according to any measure that you want, it can be revenue, profit, or loyalty, anything, experience, and PS, there will be always like high performing and low performing stores. And what we would do is try to, using ML for insights, we would seek to predict or optimize that metric that we care about, say profit. And then we would look at, and then we would create measures of similarity. So measures of similarity can be clustering, kind of like at the base level, as in unsupervised clustering. And then you can move into supervised techniques that allow you to create clustering. And one of the ones that Random Forest does is gives you the proximity matrix, which when you run hundreds of trees, say 500 trees, the proximity matrix tells you how many times these two stores ended up in the same leaf node of one of the trees. So then if you run 500 trees and you got like 400 times they ended up in the same leaf node, you divide by 500 and you get a percentage. And you're like, well, 80% of the time they were in the same leaf node. Therefore, kind of like the assumption is that they're 80% similar, these two stores. But if one of those stores is a top performing store and one of the other store is a bottom performing store, then what you can do is look in your data at the differences, because most of the data for those two stores is going to be the same or very similar. And a few data points are going to be very different. So then you look at those and you highlight those data points that are very different between the two. And you go, most things, and like I've used this in so many industries after doing it for the first time, where you go, in all these data points, these two stores are very similar. And it can be demographics of that area, the type of people that go into the store, sometimes the inventory, heaps of different, like the opening hours. And then you go, but in these things, they're really different. And when you show that to people with the domain knowledge, what I've seen is that they jump out of the seat and sometimes they go, I knew it. I knew that there was something going on. Now I can see it. And one of the examples, we were presenting that to a CEO of a retail chain, and they have many stores around Australia and New Zealand. And we showed them one of these comparisons. He jumped out and he's like, I knew it. It's the inventory that needs to change. And we didn't have inventory. We only had financials. So I was like, how did you get to inventory? And he goes, well, you're telling me that this bottom performing store is getting these type of customers, and that is a difference that it has with the high performing store. He's like, I know that the inventory that we have in that store doesn't match to the customer profile that's going to that store. Literally got the head of merchandise on the phone, changed that inventory. And then over the coming months, we saw the sales pick up, and that store became not all, like in the time that we were analyzing, it didn't go all the way to a high performing store, but it went from like bottom quintile to like the second best over a few months. And it's like, anyway, the transformation is great, but the approach is ML for insights instead of prediction. And when you're using ML for insights, for example, overfitting is fine, because you're not using it to predict the future. You're trying to get it to tell you what's in the data.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like your examples too. Because people can learn from data and they need to, but another thing that we need to do is also help them be more data literate and how to understand and make sense of that data. So that's something that's really important too. And also get access to that data. Companies and organizations have vast amounts of data, continues to grow, but you're not, for a lot of different reasons, security, privacy, different concerns, you don't always get access to that data. So we found that at organizations, we need to really talk about that and say, okay, well, if you get a little bit more data, can you get additional insights? And this is why you need it, and to make it really important and valuable. And you're right, you need to make sure that you have the correct people in the conversation, because if that guy wasn't in that situation, then you might not have people who would be able to take their domain knowledge and expertise and be able to help apply additional insights. So it's always important to make sure that you have the correct people in your AI projects as well. And we talk about that and how it's critically important, especially within each phase of the methodology, to make sure that you have those people there. At Cognilytica, we always like to talk about AI within the 7 patterns of AI. And we think that that's really important, because when you're talking about AI, you may be talking about, an autonomous vehicle, and I may be talking about an AI-enabled chatbot. Ron may be talking about a predictive maintenance system. And they're all those broad umbrella applications of AI, but they're not the same thing. So we say, it also helps shortcut projects. And also we talked about which algorithms to pick. Well, not every algorithm is the right algorithm for that problem. So understand what it is you're trying to do, and then you can pick different algorithms based on that. You had also talked about, figure out how accurate you want to be. Sometimes, just a decision tree is a great solution. Depending on the application as well, you may not need to be very accurate. Maybe 80% accurate is an acceptable threshold. So you need to set that too. And then that, a lot of different things come into play with that. With the data that you need and the algorithm that you select and how often you retrain the model. So all of that is incredibly important. And maybe I'll let Ron talk a little bit about the 7 patterns and what they are and why they're so important.
Yeah, it's really interesting because if you're doing, for example, trying to train a model to detect spam, you have a Bayesian classifier. It's perfectly fine. You're trying to do sentiment analysis. We've been using support vector machines for a long time. They work very well. You talk about random forest. We love boosted trees for a lot of things. For example, we have a couple of really interesting stories. For example, product recommendation. If you're trying to basically recommend a product, we have moved to machine learning models to do this. But, back in the day when Amazon first came out, they just used product categories. So it's like, you're in the camping category. Someone buys a tent. I will recommend other products in the camping category, or I will just simply look at what other customers who have bought products in that category have also brought. And I will basically just do a very simple rank. So it's like 9 times out of 10, someone bought a tent. They also bought a lantern or something like that. Okay, great. Well, I will recommend it. There's no machine learning there. It's simple data correlation. And actually, Amazon themselves tells the story because when they were rolling out Amazon Prime, their movie service, they wanted to basically do movie recommendations, or show recommendations. And they had a very, very hard, people were coming up with models, their own great data scientists. Trust me, they got some data scientists over there. If they can squeeze money out of something, they will do it because that's the business that they are in. And they were having a very hard time beating basically the heuristic, the dumb model, which was just recommend the top 10 most popular movies or whatever shows in a category. No algorithm needed. So it's like, they just count, literally count the number of times people watch something and sort by the number of times and reverse, sort and be like, that's what they recommend. And they were trying all these models. They're doing A/B testing. And they're like, no model performed better in terms of increasing the click rate. That's what they were trying to measure, or the view count or whatever it was. It took them like many, many, many iterations for them to finally find a model that did work out better. But actually, it's interesting to go, this is sort of like the cautionary tale, which is like, well, sometimes just finding the best model isn't the best, when we talk about we talk about the patterns because there are we do try to use these techniques of AI for solving different kinds of problems, and they're not always the same. Predictive analytics and decision support is one kind of problem where we're trying to use machines to help us make better decisions. But pattern and anomaly detection is actually a separate pattern, which is either finding the things that fit or finding the things that are exceptions, the things that don't fit, right? The anomalies. But conversational patterns is a different thing. If I'm trying to build a conversational model, whether it's NLP, understanding what the user is saying, or NLG, which is now all of a sudden becoming so popular with GPT-3, the purpose of that is really to facilitate human-machine, machine-human, and human-human communication. It's very different sort of problem. Recognition, that's kind of what kicked all this off, the ImageNet and all that image recognition was about trying to help, really, honestly, it's about processing unstructured data. That's really what it's all about. We have all these images, these videos, these emails, and it's very hard to query them. They're not structured. So can we basically come up with an approach where I could automatically classify them or automatically do these things? And there's a whole series of problems that get solved. Now, and there's also three other patterns. There's the hyper-personalization pattern, which is part of what we were just talking about, which is that treat each person or each system as its own thing, build the profile, and then basically try to find the optimal for that profile. Then there's the goal-driven systems, which is sort of like playing, finding the solution to the maze, the deep mind thing. And then the final one, of course, is the autonomous pattern, which are systems that are supposed to operate with little or no human interaction. It turns out each of those patterns have very different sets of requirements for things like accuracy. For patterns and anomalies, it's about finding the outlier. So the accuracy depends on kind of what the outlier is. If it's cybersecurity and you're trying to detect fraud, then you may have one sort of sensitivity. If it's product recommendations, you're like, being 5% wrong, what does that mean? Maybe the conversion rates are lower, maybe not. So, and then I think I have one other interesting story here because it gets to the retail point. We were actually, Kathleen and I spoke at a retail oriented, it was actually really a construction conference. And on that panel was a company that basically uses machine learning to help find locations for new retail establishments. Basically, find the best sites. The problems they run into is when they have these new concepts. So there was a company there that's in the float spa business, which is I've never been to one, but I guess you can float and be sensory deprived. And they're like, where do we put this? Where do we site these stores? And what they found is that there's an affinity. Stores that are floating tend to be located near massage and massage envy places. And they just found that there's this natural affinity, and the models help them basically find it out. And that's what they're doing. They're using the models for insight and basically say, what is this most like when it's not so obvious, right?
I love it. Oh man, so many things there for what you guys have said that I love. I love the discussion and what Kathleen was saying about data literacy. I think that's a key one to drive. And I think personal view is that I think as an industry, we can do it better. And maybe we can talk about that in a little bit. I love the Amazon example, and I love the simplicity of it. And I know that in other cases, Amazon has been in a bit of hot water with the simplicity that they're in a bit of hot water, but then people didn't realize that there were such simple approaches in the background. One other one is also around Prime, Amazon Prime, but this is for the quick delivery side. When they were launching that, they started with by getting the areas, we call it postcodes. You guys call it area codes? No.
Yeah, zip codes.
Zip codes. That's the one I was looking for. Yeah. So they ended up getting like a count of orders in the last 12 months by zip code, and then said, we'll launch Prime in the zip codes that have the most number of orders. And that was kind of like their approach, like just a quick SQL statement. And then people were like, oh, that AI is like negative or it's biased or things like that. And the simply, like I love the simple approaches to solve a problem. And then also it's an MVP. Like it's kind of like, hey guys, we're just getting started. This is like step 1 out of 1,000. Just hang on with us and we'll get there. But we wanted to get this snowball rolling early. So that's really good. I also love Ron, your point about hyper personalization and those recommendations. Amazing. At the moment, I'm working in a healthcare AI company, and that's our focus. And what I find is that in healthcare, I used to work in finance before this for a long time, and only been in healthcare for a couple of years now. And in healthcare, what I find is that the focus of AI is largely on diagnostics. So machine vision, looking at how like radiology, cardiology, what disease, X-rays, what disease does this person have? And it's kind of like very point in time. So for the people that get this, or the people that get this test, or the people that get this test, and the approach that we're taking is a system-wide. So kind of like the other side, that if you don't focus on point in time, you can focus on system-wide and following the journey of a person through the healthcare system with the different interactions, the different interventions that they get, the different people that they see through their journey and the different recommendations. And then once you essentially work to digitize that path and get information to create feedback loops, which is largely about outcomes that people are getting, where you have to ask them, then you can start giving people recommendations on their journey and where they should go to next and how to go through the maze that is the healthcare system sometimes. And And that's proving like a really interesting problem space as well.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And we talk a lot about, it's kind of interesting because we talked about the two areas where we're seeing hyper personalization being applied the most successfully is actually in finance. We talked about, referred that, and in healthcare.
Yeah.
And I honestly, actually, AI has actually been getting into a bit of trouble with diagnostics, the use of it, recognition, specifically IBM Watson. It's kind of notoriously stated their abilities here. And there was for a while, the radiology associations and had assumed that AI systems would do the first pass, but now they're all kind of backing away from it. The error rate's high and missing things. So, there's sort of less interest in that. Ironically, of course, though, AI systems are really good at the hyper personalization. What the recommendations I would give you for behavior, for treatment, for nutrition, exercise, mental well-being, all of that really is very specific to you. Like the time that you wake up in the morning, I'm not going to be recommending you go up and, do heavy weightlifting at 6 a.m. if you can't wake up before 7. So, or it might be like, yeah. Yeah, some people like the early morning run. That's like Kathleen. Some people like the working out at 9 p.m. Same thing. Different people have different diets. And so you can't. One size clearly just doesn't fit all, right? And that's really what these systems are good at. They could say, they could find the correlations and say, you're just like Netflix. It's like you're interested in these things because of your browsing history. Then you could say the same thing with medicine. These are things that will work for you based on your history. And the same thing in finance. If I'm trying to help you save for a goal or invest something, I could see your spending behavior. I could see that, you just like those $5 lattes every day. I'm not going to kick that habit. We'll have the health conversation separately, but from a finance perspective, I can tell you, hey, that's $150, $200 a month. And, you could probably put that money away to save pay your whatever that you need to pay off. And that would help a lot. And like, thanks for that recommendation. So this is the interesting, these are the very practical ways in which AI and machine learning are providing benefit today. And when we talk about AI today, that's why we're so surprised that the companies that have been running into challenges are like, well, how does it work so well in this relatively trivial example, and you're just having such a hard time? It's clearly the mismatch between all the things we had talked about. So we're sort of pounding it. We hope 2021 and 2022 are the year that it sort of really clicks in.
Yeah, right. It like that, and I think that we're getting there. We're making good progress. But I think as an industry, we and this is just one dude's view, like one dude's point of view. In my opinion, I think that we need to do a better explanation of how people can get involved in the process and add value. What we've been doing is data literacy programs where we say, learn how to make dashboards or learn how to do SQL queries, learn a bit about the machine learning algorithms, and then you'll be a better stakeholder. You'll be able to have the conversation, jump into projects, add value, help with your domain expertise or business knowledge. And I kind of think that we're not highlighting enough the critical pieces that it comes down to the data set that we are going to be, first of all, it comes down to the business problem, as you guys said. Once we have agreement on that, when we come to the technical delivery, it comes down to the data set. Like, what data do we have, or should we put in here to help make this prediction or optimization? Part A. And then part B is like, what are we trying to predict? What are we trying to optimize? What's our one thing that we're trying to do? And I think that often we jump, as Kathleen was saying, that we jump into these projects without that clarity, and we kind of try to stumble our way into clarity, and as a result, means that our projects drag out, that we are not able to sometimes even get to hitting the mark. But in the technical delivery phase, I reckon it's all about those two things. And then once you have your AI product, then we talk about the supply chain, like getting it to users and then getting the adoption and getting people to change their routines, their behaviors. And in that space, I've seen some really nice suggestions from people that I've had in the podcast, where there was one guy that just his story stuck out, still sticks with me, that he works in the energy sector, and they have natural gas plants. And they had like 20,000 sensors in a natural gas plant, and they were uploading all the data in real time onto the cloud, crunching it, coming back with recommendations for the operators. And when they went to provide those recommendations, what I loved about this is that they didn't just hit everyone with the recommendation. Ron, do this. Kathleen, do this. Felipe, do this. What they said was, like, they essentially put iPads all over the plant. And what it said was, hey, Ron, when you were doing this shift 2 weeks ago, you were running this plant at a 2% better, 2% more effective. You were doing this 2 weeks ago. Would you like to know what you were doing differently? Click here for yes. You could leave it, you could take it. No judgment. So then, obviously, some people took it, some people didn't, some people were talking. They did that for a year. For a year. And then they moved into phase 2, which was, instead of comparing yourself, you versus you, then they expanded to say, you versus others in this shift. So, hey, Kathleen, other people that, or you and other people that have done this exact shift have gotten 3% more output from this plant. Would you like to know what they did? Yes, bang. Another year. And obviously in the background, it's working with the people, educating, user adoption, making sure that people know that they're not going to get replaced, and getting them comfortable, and essentially getting to a point where the majority of people are opting in. So that was year 2. And then year 3, the recommendation straight away. People could choose to ignore them, but the recommendation was there and it was open. And I particularly love that delivery because it created intrigue on what it could be, and it started with you versus you, and that they took the time to create the change.
I think they were also starting to build trust as well, right? Because if people don't trust these systems, if they're fearful of them, then they're not going to want to use them. And that's another thing that we run into a lot. You know, people fear automation, people fear AI. They think it's going to take their jobs. They feel threatened by that. And, you know, you need to work with people and say, we're not trying to replace you. We're trying to have you do your job better. And this is what we're bringing into place so we can do that. You know, there's certain tasks, certain things that people do on a daily basis that really they shouldn't be doing. You should automate that. You know, you don't need to be pressing a button every minute on the minute for 60 minutes, you know, something like that, where it's like, this isn't what I hired you for. I can automate that process. So we, you know, I like your example. We think about that as this idea of augmented intelligence, where you're not replacing the human, but you're helping them do their job better. So you're taking the best of what humans can do and the best of what, you know, AI and computers can do, and combine it together so that this person that you're not replacing just gets to do their job better because, you know, the system's helping them with various tasks and recommending different things to them, you know, maybe depending on what the role is, all of that changes, obviously. But we like to think about this idea of augmented intelligence. And we say that that's a great first place to start because you can really provide a lot of value. It provides immediate ROI and you can see immediate results. And also you're building trust with these people in your organization because you do value your employees and the knowledge that they bring into the organization.
Yeah, I think the other interesting thing here is that you know, people have this desire. I think we talk about this about taking the robot out of the human. It's sort of like this unusual thing. It's like usually people do a job. They have a job, right?
I love that.
But their work, it's like something like their work and their job aren't the same. People like those terms seem to be interchangeable, but they're not really interchangeable. It's sort of like, well, your job is customer satisfaction, but you spend half of your time, the work that you do, entering stuff into a database or filling out a form or doing this sort of thing, which is necessary because perhaps it won't work without it. But that's not really your job. It's like your job is the other part. And actually, what we'd like to do is recover more of your time so you can really do more of your job. It's that the automation paradox, and it really has been a paradox. Actually, the world is one big living paradox right now in many ways. Again, we'll bring up Amazon only because they make so much news. But New York Times did a study when Amazon introduced their Kiva robots, the robots that were in their warehouses to do the pick and pack and help with all that sort of stuff. And people had anticipated that would mean that warehouse employment would probably either stay the same or go down. But actually, the paradox is that as Amazon was increasing their use of the machines, their employment was going up. So it's sort of like automation was going up and employment was going up, which you would not correlate. You would say that doesn't seem right, right? Well, that's because what they were doing is they were using the people to do all these things that they couldn't have done because they're spending all their time just taking boxes off of a shelf or taking something and putting it in a box, which is really like the worst use of human time. It's like, this is not what we're good at. You can use machines for that. And that's exactly what they did. And so this paradox kind of goes along many places. And the world is one weird paradox now because here we actually have this unusual situation. I think it's worldwide. It's definitely in the US, maybe in Australia, where we have actually low employment numbers, but companies are also having a hard time finding people to do very to do everything from hospitality, restaurants, delivery, supply chain. And actually, a lot of companies are facing issues with their business, not because of high costs or low demand. They have enough demand. The problem is that they can't supply the demand. Yep. It's the strangest thing. And like, what has changed in the world? Well, turns out there's lots and lots and lots of factors, but that's why we say, like, don't worry. The last thing you need to worry about is a robot taking your job because people can't hire enough. So it's like, it's the jobs that people would have thought would have been automated first. There might be pressure now, ironically, because of low labor supply. There might be pressure now to increase automation, but it's not because of high labor cost. That's the thing that people thought it would be. Oh, it's too expensive for me to hire a person. No. They can't hire a person even if they increase the labor price. They can't hire that person. So I guess we got to use robots because what other choice do we have? We don't want to go out of business, right? So it's
so true. So true. Same thing happening here where, the way that I see it is that a job is there to solve a problem or fulfill a need. We've got lots of problems to solve in the world. And we, as humans, we've got more and more needs every day. Like our expectations are continually rising. There's always going to be another gap. I totally agree with you that the sort of the job apocalypse. I don't see it. I don't see it coming in either. I do love the way that you describe it in terms of taking the robot out of the job. I think that is ace, and that's definitely where we need to move into. So people are able to add more value and spend the time where they should be.
Well. I mean, Kathleen and I, we'd like to talk about this. We'll have you on our podcast. So that's sort of like the other thing. We're doing this little podcast swap here. So for listeners of your podcast, you should know that we're interviewing Felipe on our podcast. We have a bunch of questions we'll be digging into on the AI Today podcast. Maybe it's a good time for us to mention. I don't know if we talked a little bit about it. I think we were talking about it's been around for about 4 years and now going into our 5th year. But we're really focusing. Our audience. We're trying to focus on the people trying to put this in technology, AI into practice. And it's very strange to say this. As much as we love AI, we're really fans of kind of where AI can be, but we're also realists. And that it's like, at the end of the day, in order for this technology to stick around and be successful, it has to be providing tangible benefits, or we'll just find ourselves where we always find ourselves with AI, which is that it's of interest, it bubbles up and we're so excited and it could do all these things. And then 6, 7, 8 years later, we're like, it didn't work, overpromise, all these crazy AGI people doing crazy things. and then we go back to doing enterprise databases or whatever is the hot thing, cloud, stuff. And we kind of go back to it, and we'll be back here again in 10, 15 years from now. So, or 20. But we're fans of it. It's almost kind of weird in some ways that we're using the term AI for many of the things that we're talking about, that we would maybe not have necessarily ascribed the intelligent machine to better predictive analytics and pattern and anomaly detection and boosted trees. But it is also true that a lot of the problems that are sort of classical AI problems have to do with things like understanding human speech. We had a podcast interview with the Applied AI podcast where the host, she asked us, she goes, well, is the Turing test still relevant? And that's a really very good question, because you could argue that with GPT-3 and a whole bunch of things, we're doing a good job of fooling humans. That machines are the ones having the conversation. So is that a true test of machine intelligence? And things are probably changing there. But it's kind of strange that for a long time, the test of is a machine intelligent was about conversations.
Yeah.
And now we're like, oh, we've solved that, 2 years ago, but we don't have intelligent machines. So, I don't know, Kathleen.
Well, we actually had another podcast with the hosts from the Harvard Data Science Review podcast. And they were saying, start to really be scared when AI can tell a joke and it makes sense. Because there's a lot of different things that come into play. Like, yes, you have to get natural language, but you have to also have common sense and reasoning and understand what a joke is and what makes it funny, and get people's reactions. So that was really interesting because, we said we have a long way to go before we get to there. But once an AI can tell a joke, then be scared. So is the Turing test relevant? Maybe that should be the new one.
I don't know. I watched a video that generated by an AI that consumed like thousands of hours of stand-up comedy on YouTube. And the video was rendered. So there was like a guy on a stage and there was the audience. And he was telling jokes, and he bombed in the middle. Like, he started really well. The audience was loving it. Then he bombed in the middle, and then he brought it back in. And some of the jokes were terrible. There's a couple in there that I had a chuckle, and I was like, this is pretty good. And I think now that there's kind of, as you were saying, more with the generation side of text, that where AI is able to write, then I think that jokes are not a far stretch from where things are today. In my personal view, just one dude's opinion. But I think that we naturally, as humans, we keep moving the goalpost. Right. That whatever is out of reach, that's AI. Like, that's the machine intelligence. And whatever's in reach, that's solved. At one point, it was chess, right? If a machine can play chess, we're doomed. It's over. Right. We can just pack and go home. And then
the singularity.
Deep Blue. And then they were like, okay, well, we still got jobs. We're able to get more value from this technology. It's not this magical realm. And I think we're seeing more and more innovations of that ilk. In the past decade with AlphaGo or with the protein folding, like this stuff that is gonna revolutionize our lives in 10 years, in 20 years, that are things that are breakthrough today. I think that GPT-3 is another great example that, in years to come, definitely in a decade from now, we're going to look back and say, shit, look at all these things that we're able to get because of the protein folding algorithm that DeepMind created and then released, which is amazing, or because of GPT-3 and so yeah, I think that in general, we will continue to move the goalpost. Whatever is out of reach is AI, and we'll see magical. Whatever's in reach is solved. One of the ones that happened in the last, say, 5 years or so that I'd been personally looking forward to for a long time was going from text to an image and image to text. So to say, like, I want to see a bird with like brown chest and black wings and a yellow beak on this tree. You type that and then the image appears. I was like, that's going to be magical. And then it happened and I was like, not so magical. Like, but I love it. Yeah, it's things that are chipping away at the progress that we need to make. And I think that there will always be a need for human creativity to sit on top of that and to think about what is actually the problem that we're trying to solve. What is the data that should go into it? What should we be optimizing for? Because there's things that haven't happened. There's spaces that haven't been explored that need to be explored. So not the data that is kind of like backward looking or using what already exists to predict the future. Super helpful, obviously, like revolutionizing every industry out there. But it wouldn't have been able to give us Cirque du Soleil, right? Where if you think of Cirque du Soleil as being in the circus industry had been in decline for over 100 years. The moves that the industry had made was to have more rings in the tent, to travel, to have animals, to have all this type of stuff. And then the human innovation was to say, how about we flip this on its head and we go high-end, expensive, one ring, super talented people, and then we travel with that and no animals. And it's something that making that leap and making that work in the world as a business opportunity is not something that I think AI can't do now. Maybe not in the short to medium term. And that's where I see that humans are continue to be adding value, and where we should focus on in the creative side of what the world could be by understanding what we all want and need.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that's sort of a great way to kind of wrap things up here, and maybe something we could tackle on a future podcast. I sort of like the challenges of making all this work, and we could talk a little bit about the fact that privacy as an idea may actually be antiquated at this point. There may not really be a notion of privacy anymore. The thing that we're starting to see is actually probably a bigger casualty now that the privacy train has already left the station. Is I guess the word is genuineness. I don't know what's the right adjective for that. It's like, are things truly genuine? Because with especially with AI, you really can't believe anything you see, you hear, you read, and like now, like there was this, I just saw another place. There's a machine that will like writes like letters that looks like they're handwritten, but like doesn't use the handwriting font. Like it actually uses like a writing thing, and it's like someone's like, I'm using it to write thank you letters, but it's like. Or there's this other thing where we saw this company that has a video that'll basically just record one video saying thank you to a customer, and then it basically takes that and uses deep fakes to create these deep fake thank you videos. It's like, now you can send personalized thank you messages. I'm like, it comes at the price of, nothing is really genuine anymore. Social media, we know, is not genuine. Instagram is all a bunch of fake. So it's like you can't. It's like we're losing that too. That's a whole other conversation. We don't have to have it here now, but people maybe we'll start to see some laws around data genuineness. I don't even know what the right word is for that.
I know.
It's not privacy. Yeah. That's a whole other concept. Mm-hmm.
And at Cognilytica too, we talk about ethical and responsible AI and the uses for that as well. And we have some education around that and training as well, because when you're building these systems, you need to make sure that you are building them in a responsible and ethical way, and not intentionally trying to do harm. So we think that that's just as incredibly important as methodology as well, so do AI right with the methodology, but also build it in a responsible and ethical way. And so we think that that's incredibly important. And that's why we have also training around that.
She's actually got me thinking. It's like doing AI right. So it's like doing AI right methodology, but also doing AI right.
Hey.
Being right, responsible.
I like it. Why the face off, Kathleen? I love it.
Two sides of the same coin. Two sides of the same
coin. Yeah, I totally agree.
It.
Thanks for watching this video all the way to the end. I hope that you got a lot out of this discussion. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe to the channel so more people can find out about the challenges that leaders have in the analytics and AI space. And that's what we're trying to share in Data Futurology. So please like and subscribe. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends. Thank you so much.